Happy Monday, or whatever day it is.
Welcome to the couch.
We excited to be here. How y'all feeling?
It's been a year. We still going.
Still going.
In year 2, technically.
Second year at a bouch. That feels pretty good.
It does. And our first episode of the first year was introducing you to us. And since then, like, you've gotten to know so much more about us. The last episode was pretty random. And, we let people ask us questions, whatever. We had done a live episode. So we've been through a lot. So we appreciate you guys being here along the journey with us.
We do. And if y'all aren't watching the video, Lex look good today. So just make sure you check it out.
Every once in a while when your trainer says we don't have the gym, I can actually do something with my hair.
Shout out to Ryan Kelly.
Right. Not that it looks crazy pulled back, but, you do what you do. When you really decide to do something, your priorities change. So I'm good. So, Carlie, today for our 53rd episode of Carlie's Couch, what are we discussing?
Boundaries. But how did we get here? What did something inspire this topic, or?
Actually, what made me think about boundaries is somebody, and I've forgotten his @ now, because he responded when I asked for questions for our Hodgepodge episode. Mm-hmm. And he asked specifically about boundaries with work, and we talked about that in the episode. But that made me, and it triggered me to think about just overall boundaries for a person. And I'm like, oh, that's something that's pretty important and has to do with a lot of the things we've discussed thus far anyway, and yet we hadn't had a discussion just on boundaries. And immediately, like, even reading his question, just thinking about boundaries in general, I had so many thoughts about it. So I was like, oh, I should just write this stuff down now and set up an episode for us to just do completely on the topic.
Yeah, and I'm pretty excited about it. That's, when you said it, I was like, oh, duh, I'm surprised we haven't actually done an episode on boundaries, because I think they're so important. So you see the word boundary and people using it a lot on Instagram memes and on Twitter all the time about boundaries with toxic people and all this stuff. So what do boundaries look like?
Boundaries look like you putting yourself first and you protecting your own needs and your own self-interest.
Mm-hmm. Boundaries can also look like saying no. Just very simply saying no, saying yes to things, just siphoning out like what you actually want to do in your life and like what you don't, and not bending those.
Mm-hmm. Whether you acknowledge specifically like what your boundaries are, or it's just something you do without, having put the term to it or name to it. Having boundaries is, I think that goes hand in hand with living with intent. If you're doing something with intent, there are certain things that you're not going to accept and certain things that you will accept. And so I think it's just being very clear on what that is for your life.
And so in thinking about setting these boundaries, like, why do you set them and how do they serve you? So you said like being clear, but what else? Why else would you set a boundary?
What's the question?
Why would you set boundaries? Like, how do they serve you? Like I said, you mentioned it, like, and just like being clear about like your intention and what you're doing, but why else might you set them?
Boundaries serve you because without boundaries, you are just flapping through the wind. And you are going along with what happens to you, and it's not you determining where you're going to go, what you're going to put up with, who you will deal with, who you won't deal with. And so they serve you by giving you your power, I think, and they serve you by allowing you to get to what you need faster. If you're not sure where you stand with certain things, or you let people kind of push your boundaries on certain things, you're spending more time on the wrong things. You're spending more time wasting your time. You're spending your time doing stuff that doesn't lead to where you're trying to get to with intention, or the goals that you want to set for yourself. You're kind of letting other people run your life. And so to set boundaries, I think that's the best way and the only way to give yourself your own power and to make sure you're moving with intent.
I love that. Boundaries help you create the life that you want to live, and not just the ones that's given to you.
Right.
So it's kind of like learning how to play your cards. Like, you have this set amount of cards, but it's learning how to play them in a way that best benefits you.
Mm-hmm. When did you first hear about the term? Because you mentioned seeing it all the time on Twitter, and I feel like it didn't used to really be like that. So for you, what is your like knowledge and like research of the word?
So I first heard it with my mentor. So in like my journey of self-love, like when I really started going into this like holistic health and wellness and learning to love myself and about myself, boundaries, because it came up through codependency. We started talking about codependency, and boundaries was a word that I was like, I mean, I have boundaries. And you start researching, you're like, oh, maybe I don't. Maybe I am just kind of letting these things happen. And then it was further, like whenever I started going to therapy and actually figuring out what they are. I don't think that boundaries have always been as popular, but I do think they're like a super popular word right now, and they're kind of everywhere, all over social media. But I don't know if people actually like have researched and understand what they look like for themselves and like what they are. What about you?
I first heard about boundaries, or it stuck with me as something like, what is this? And trying to understand it at least. Maybe last year, like 2018. So maybe that's like when it stuck, if anything. Maybe I'd heard it before, but it didn't mean anything to me. But when I found the podcast, and maybe 2017 actually, when I found the podcast, The Baggage Reclaim by Natalie Liu, she's a British Black woman, but it's a really good podcast about understanding your relationships and how the things in your past or different things like your baggage is what's kind of propelling you in the same patterns and how to break those and identify them. So it's really, really good. And so anytime, like if I have a friend who's going through a breakup or something like that, or having like relationship issues, I always recommend it because it's just so good at kind of letting you recognize your own power. Anyway, of course, so she's talking a lot about boundaries. And I'm sure there's maybe one main episode, but it's mentioned all throughout, of course. And I was really like, oh my gosh. And she has a website too, thebaggagereclaim.com, because there's a zillion blog posts, whether you don't listen to the podcast. And really it's those blog posts where it's really just, you know, when you read some things and you're like, man, this is exactly like my life. Like, this is what I'm going through. And it's like, if you feel like this, like you're always, you know, the one who's asking them, well, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And you're the one who's, you know, feeling this way or that way. It's because you are not the one setting your boundaries. And so learning about that and what those look like was definitely from that. And I was so into the podcast and that blog because of what I was going through with the relationship at the time. And it made me spend so much time with my own self-discovery that I really realized myself that I hadn't thought about what those boundaries were and hadn't set them for myself. And so I really saw how important that was. Not that I got it right immediately, but that's where I first saw what it was and understood it.
I think that's really important. And it's interesting how life like brings us to these points of self-discovery where you do start researching and figuring out like, oh, this is something that I can do and kind of own my power in these situations. Because it can be really difficult if you've never had experience with it. Like we didn't hear about it until, you know, at least like mid-20s or later in life. And so figuring out like what they are, what they look like, and how to enforce them can be difficult.
And you're right. Like, I think you have to be exposed to it, first of all, which is why it's important, again, like with the things you do, like with curriculum and working with kids. And even I do get excited as I see more adults talk about it, because while I have seen some people on, you know, social media platforms become those, God, they do this in every category, whether it's like comics, anime, therapy, whatever. Like the people who feel like they've been knowing about it for the longest time, all of a sudden like, oh, y'all all want to talk about this now, you know, and it's like, well, let's have a conversation about it. And so I do feel like I see a lot of people that will talk about boundaries or the importance of it. And then I also see people who talk about like, oh, I'm so tired of seeing people talk about certain words because they're almost like buzzwords. But I think that's on the individual, whether something bothers you or not when you see it online. Like nothing should bother you, so you should check yourself. But yeah, I think a lot of people are hearing it and more familiar with it, which I think is really a good thing and going in the right direction.
I think so too. It's interesting because I just had no idea like what the concept was. And so it was so new for me. And then I started looking at like all of my relationships, and like from familial relationships to friendships to romantic to business. And I was like, God dog, like I don't have any boundaries. Like I'm not doing a great job of setting boundaries for myself, but it's like, what do I even set them on, and where do I even start? And then that like causes a large deep dive into like myself.
Yeah, and what you just said is a big reason why it's hard to enforce them, or why people don't, is because we haven't really heard about it, and now you're so programmed by the time you're whatever age, honestly, 20, 30s especially, now you're so programmed that it's very difficult to think about that. And isn't it so weird that we're socialized and we grow up like, and I guess not everybody, but that so many of us grow up where you're not necessarily about putting yourself first, like, and you are, right? Like overall, everyone's like, yeah, you know, take care of yourself, whatever. But like the way things are enforced, it's always like your family, the community kind of first, maybe church first, like whatever it is. I feel like there's so much emphasis on community and what your part is that they don't tell you, hey, make sure you tell people where to stop and go in your life with it as well.
Yeah, I think we're socialized from a very young age just to do things and go with what the status quo is. Like even on the base level, like with little kids, like if you see someone like with their kids and you're like, hi, and the little kid don't want to talk, parents be like, nah, be polite and talk, or be polite and hug them, even if the child doesn't want to.
Right,
And I saw one of those dope videos with millennial teachers because y'all are killing it. But like they had a little like board of like high five, hug, fit, like dabbing somebody up. And you come into the classroom and you get a pick. Like which one you feel comfortable with the teacher. And I'm like, wow, that's giving the kids like agency of choice.
That's good
to pick whatever they feel comfortable with. And I was like, wow, that's teaching them early that it's okay to have boundaries.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. That's good because we don't really think about it like that, or you don't think about how different people are and what they receive and how they want to deal with other people. So I think that's pretty cool, actually.
I love that. And I think whenever you do the opposite, like you make kids do things that they feel uncomfortable with or talk to a person they don't feel comfortable, like it's telling them like whatever the other person's needs are more important than theirs, even on a very subconscious base level.
Yeah, and that's what it is, that other people's needs are more important than yours. Have you ever found it difficult to like enforce your boundaries, or what kind of factors go into that?
Yes. Boundaries are hard because I realized like back when I first figured out, so this was like 23, 24, that I was like people pleasing. And, others people's needs were important than mine. So if they needed something, like I would move around my whole schedule and do something and like kind of put myself out to dry. And like for other people, also family, because you're supposed to like do all of these things for them and be there. And for me, especially like, my mom and I had this big thing because she didn't have any boundaries at the time because that just wasn't how she was raised. That wasn't how she was raising me. And then I remember whenever I first did, it was this huge thing for her. It was very uncomfortable, but then she came around and was like, you know what, you're right. And so I think it's like my relationship with the people, like if I care about them and I still want them in my life, and how do I navigate getting what I want while at the same time, like, still respecting their needs, but making sure I'm not putting theirs over mine. So I think it was the hardest balance for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And really with people pleasing and needing a validation, when you're letting people cross your boundaries, you're kind of just saying that need is more important than those other needs. So maybe one of the biggest things really is identifying your needs and like really getting those down, because sometimes we don't know, just like when we talked about goals and other things about ourselves, it's like you're living and you're here, but if somebody said, what do you need? Even if it was like just out of a friendship, or what do you need out of a relationship?
Yeah.
You might have to think about it for a second, or you may say some things and then look at that and be like, well, that's not really it. Or, like maybe that shouldn't be that or whatever. But I think a lot of times it's clarifying that as well. And so if you're growing up used to things happening a certain way, you never have that reason to like think about, well, what do I need, unless you're that teacher or that whoever, that parent who does give them that agency, who does speak to them that way, et cetera.
Exactly. And then it just becomes this cycle. And I noticed it in myself and a lot of my friends, like, oh, I don't know what I need. I've always thought about other people, but if you don't ever take the time to get clear about what you need, you're never going to get it because you don't know how to communicate it. You don't know how to ask for it. You don't know how to work towards it. It's like, oh, I'm gonna go to the movies, but you don't Google a theater. You just kind of aimlessly driving around the city. And so you have to do that work to figure out what you need and what you want.
Whose fault is it when your boundaries are crossed?
Mine. I always say it's twofold. So it's definitely mine if I haven't communicated them and communicated my expectations and I'm not enforcing them. Like if I tell you, Lex, don't call me after 11. Every day you call me at 11:30 and I answer, hey, girl. Clearly, that's not a serious boundary. But if I'm enforcing it and you continue to do it, I have the opportunity to either cut you out of my life or tell you to do, you need to enforce it or just to stop answering. So it's like once I've communicated it, it becomes the other person. But if I allow you to continue, it's definitely on me.
And what's interesting about that as well is if you express, don't call me after 11:30, that is what you want. You want to be that person who's doing it, right? This is how we say again with the tweets. Like if you're tweeting about certain things, like you want to be that person. That's what you think is important. That's what you think is your value. But there's still this cognitive dissonance when now if we still end up knowing like, all right, every time, that guy calls and you still pick up, you still pick up, you still pick up, your actions are telling you what is your real boundary. That's not your real boundary.
That's not your real boundary.
But that's what it needs to be. And so that's really when you need to do a self-check about, well, what need am I putting before? If there's some negative effect there, if now like you're having trouble sleeping or you're having trouble getting up or whatever, maybe if there's no negative effect, you can always go back and say, well, maybe it's different or whatever. But if you're starting to feel any kind of resentment or any kind of, I'm being taken for granted or any kind of whatever with a person or with the situation, then that's usually a sign to re-examine your boundaries and which ones you're letting get crossed for you to feel that way.
Yeah, and if you're lying to yourself about what your real goals, wants, and needs are, because we talk about that all the time. Sometimes we say we want things, but it's like, do you really, or is that what you feel you should want, or that you need, but you actually don't want that or need that because it's not societally acceptable to do the opposite.
Right. If you didn't have any boundaries, or when you didn't have boundaries, like what kind of was happening in your life?
I always felt taken for granted. I always felt like unappreciated. You start to kind of get upset with people. It's like I was upset, but I didn't know why I was upset. Like I was helping, people and always putting myself on the back burners, but I'm not figuring out why. Like most recently I've noticed this because I was waking up in the morning and going to work and then doing all my client stuff and running errands and doing all this and saving my work for the end of the day. And I was exhausted. So I wasn't getting anything done. And I started getting upset and wasn't finishing my client's work. And I was like, what is the issue? It's like, oh, I'm not addressing what I need first. And so I've had to kind of flip that around. But I think whenever you're not going after what you want, whenever you're not setting boundaries, like you can become resentful, bitter. You might end up lashing out at people and they don't understand why. It's like if I've never told you that I had a boundary and you keep crossing it and subconsciously I start to get angry and then I might lash out and you're like, yo, what's wrong with you? And so that's just some of the things that have happened.
Okay.
What about you?
I kind of said mine already. I think that you get to what you want faster. I think that you're flung around in the wind a lot less. But also I think that your mood is less affected, that you're less way excited and way low. That energy you feel when like that person has not called you for like 3 days and you're starting to feel some kind of way. But then they could call you right next and then you're super excited. And it's like, where was that energy that whole time? You're waiting for other things to validate your inner energy. And so when you aren't in defined boundaries, I feel like that's when your mood is like real up and down, more so with other people. Other people are affecting you too much. So when I don't have boundaries, that's what I notice. And because of that, now I don't have as much strength. I don't have as much power. I'm not even putting more into myself. So it kind of snowballs into more of like a woe is me thing instead of me feeling confident, me having my own power, me getting the things I need done, and me fulfilling my own needs. So you're doing less waiting around and you're just really moving in a better place to where all the right people around you are attracted to that anyway. All the right people are in that path anyway. And it's almost like by not having boundaries, you're trying to hold on to things that you don't even need to be holding on to anyway. So it's like, let go of all that stuff when you could just be having a better life if you were putting your life first.
It's so interesting. It's counterintuitive, right? Because we think like, oh, if we, put other people first, like we'll get all these things that we need and it'll come back. It's like, no, you actually have to let go, learn how to put yourself first. And then that energy, the universe just continues because it sees you going after it. Like in The Alchemist, it's like once you decide to follow your personal legend, the whole universe conspires to help you together to help you achieve it. And I love that. And so if you're feeling drained or feeling like you're giving your power away and upset with other people, like it's not them, it's you. And that's not a bad thing. That's a great point of reference so that you can move forward in a way that protects your energy, your time, and helps you stay, at your peak level all the time. And it's not dependent on other people.
Yeah, it's just being committed to you. And part of that is having the boundaries to know what you will and will not accept from people in the world around you. And so even to say put yourself first and to set boundaries does not even mean that you're not treating other people with respect, that you're not caring about other people, but because you are taking care of yourself, you're in better position to impact the world, impact others, affect others as well. And so also from the other side of that, if you're a person, like if I'm a super late night person and Carlie's like, yo, I really don't want to answer the phone after 11, then for me to keep calling her is like badly affecting her boundaries. And so like you also, even if I feel like, oh, well, I'm not up during the day or I don't have any time during the day, like you still don't really have reign to like cross somebody else's boundaries either. So I think that is something that you have discussions about where in order for things to not lead to resentment, especially if it's just like friendships too, or people that are close to your life, setting your boundaries when they're not used to them will require discussion, because otherwise I feel like you just get kind of passive aggressive on it.
Mm-hmm. And I think boundaries are necessary in friendships and relationships, and they actually make them healthier. Like whenever you're doing everything that you need to do to take care of yourself, then and someone else is doing everything that they need to do to take care of themselves, then it's like a healthier relationship instead of being something codependent or where you keep on disrespecting each other's boundaries. So I feel like that's a huge area of improvement if you're looking to improve any type of relationship, friendship, business, anything. Like I have a friend, well, Kiara, y'all have seen Kiara, she was on the show, but she doesn't answer work emails after 5 or 5:30 p.m. She just doesn't. And like, she lets people know if they send that thing at 5:32, she will check it in the morning. And that just is what it is.
So then, like with her, she has boundaries with her work. What other areas can you have boundaries in? Because I think we've kind of talked a lot about like friends and relationships, but what else?
I would say friends, family, business. Like this is my timeline. Like I will get back to you in 2 days. Like, you know, if you have a 24-hour response time for emails or 48, like setting things for that. I also think it's important for yourself to set boundaries for yourself. Like I need to make sure that I'm working out, or I need to make sure that I'm spending at least an hour a day on my projects aside from everything else. And so setting
Are those still boundaries if you're saying things that you want to do for yourself?
If I like block off in my head, yes, because if I block off that time and not letting anything else cross into this time that I have set aside for myself, then yes.
Okay. So how do you frame boundaries? And are they positive things? Are they things that you don't want to let happen? Or
I try to do them positively. Like anything that I do, like even affirmations, it's not like I'm not going to fail. It's like I'm going to succeed, like thinking about it like that. And so it's like, you know, I'm pouring into myself. I need to make sure that I set aside time every single day for myself.
Okay, so then with those areas of places that you can set boundaries in mind, where do you find it kind of easier to set boundaries, or, and then where do you find it harder to set boundaries?
So it's easier to set them with family, with friends, with like going out and stuff like that. Like I'm really good at being like, nah, which I used to not be. But with myself, it's a lot harder, like making sure that I set time for my business, for which I'm getting better at because I put it at the front of the day instead of at the end. And so I feel a lot better about it. But also with like special people in my life, like the person that we talked about earlier, like you get all excited when they call, and like if you aren't, you know, the healthiest version of yourself, you might be sad if they don't. Like that, like with that special person is probably the hardest thing for me.
Okay.
What about you?
For me, I find it, I think, pretty easy across the board with work stuff. Like with clients, I really try to have particular boundaries. Like I try not to get like besties with them, and like don't text me, or don't text me after certain times, depending on who it is, things like that, with emails especially. I feel like that's fairly easy to do. I think it's fairly easy with my friends, but there's also not very many things that have pushed my boundaries for me to really have to think hard about like certain things that I don't want to happen.
Has it always been like that, or just
What part? Or
like that people haven't ever really pressed your boundaries to where you had to think about them like that?
well, you have to care about to a certain level about certain things. Like, so if certain things don't bother me, then it's not bothering me to need to set a boundary. Only in places where I trip myself up with people who are on a pedestal, if that is in some kind of maybe a client or a person I'm in a relationship with or want to be with or something like that. Only if somebody's like on a pedestal, if I'm seeing them in that type of light, am I prone to maybe do too much or put too much expectation into it or something like that. But for the most part, it's very easy for me to say no to things because of the person. And if sometimes, again, it's hard for myself, like how you said, keep your own boundaries. And I only say that because sometimes if it is hard for me to say no, it's because I'm having trouble with myself. Like, should I do that? Well, it's not exactly in my services, but I could use that extra project, or, and you're kind of going against what your intuition, because you're trying to make it logically make sense. But that's more so with me than like with the person asking. Like, I don't know, it gets even easier, honestly, to even like turn down business when it's like not the right type of business too. So overall, I think as I see more so how much better it is when I'm doing things that I want to do, that's kind of all I do. And like, so I'm dealing with people who respect that for the most part.
No, I love that. I think that's one of the biggest revelations is like not taking things that aren't in alignment. Like just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should. Just because that check is nice doesn't mean that you necessarily need to do this thing that's not in alignment for this money that's not in alignment, because all it does is detract away from what you're actually passionate about and actually working on.
Yeah. Yeah. Moving with intent has been so much more important to me. And anytime I do get emotional about something, or, you know, if I'm in a space where I might not make the best immediate decision, when I do stop, or if I come back to that and think back about it, again, like especially with boundaries, mostly have to deal with other people. And so before I, you know, text that person or call that person or do whatever, like I tend to always take enough time to think about it myself and realize like, okay, like this is me, or, you know, this is why I feel like this, or actually I don't really have a problem, or I should not have a problem. And so a lot of stuff I kind of can solve without it being like letting them cross my boundaries. Like I can set myself to like, all right, this is how I need to be moving forward. And then it kind of just continues to set the pace to where I want it.
Yeah, I think the best place is to always start with yourself, and then that'll help alleviate or at least lessen those situations where you get in where people can step over them and tap dance on them. So you talked a little bit about what that process looks like for you. How do you set your boundaries? Do you write them down?
The only time I did write them down was in 2017, and that's why I have this book for people who are watching the video. One of my books, because I had written it down in here. But these were from, it's Defining Healthy Boundaries. I always go back in and put a keyword if I'm like, no, it needs to make sure they're healthy. But what's interesting, this is from December 15th, 2017. I think I got these from one of the Baggage Reclaim blog posts where she has like ideals of things to use as boundaries, which I think is important so people know like what you're talking about. So these were like only relationship ones. But the funny thing is, when I looked back at it, some of it is like I won't spend time waiting around, or I won't put my life on hold for anyone. Under no circumstance would I date someone who's married or has a partner. Like random stuff like this. Well, not random, but what I won't let devalue me, or what things I'll take or not accept. But then as I read back through them again, I realized that a lot of them, you know, at the time, I was only researching and looking this stuff up because I felt like my boundaries are being crossed. But then I was realizing that I was neglecting myself in all of these areas. And even like literally today, looking back at this to see, you know, prepare for the topic in our notes, I was like, oh, like I was just really bad at all of those things, honestly. Or like I was not validating myself in a lot of those spaces, which is why they seem kind of angry looking back at them. Like I was writing down things like, I don't want somebody to do this to me or whatever. But a lot of it now, like if I were to sit down and write my boundaries, I think would be a little bit different. A little bit more open, a little bit more concrete. Or maybe it's just that I don't think I would even need to put some of these things down the same anymore. But that's the only time I'd written them out. And that was just because writing is easier when you can't talk to that person for whatever reason, or if there's no need to sometimes. Like sometimes you don't need to be having discussions with everybody. Like if you know it's something you're moving away from, it's just kind of figuring it out for yourself and you being okay with it yourself. And so that's why when I do a lot of writing, it was for that. But I haven't since then, and I feel like I'm pretty clear. I mostly am thinking about what am I intent on doing, more so than like what are the boundaries that I won't let somebody cross, I think.
Yeah.
Have you ever written yours out?
I haven't ever written them out, but I do write down what I want. And then in knowing that, like that helps me set across boundaries, for example, or set boundaries. Recently, I got offered a position that is just like part-time, super dope, something that like I would love to do. But I kind of sat with it and I was like, as cool as this is, it's not really in alignment with what I'm doing. And I kind of had to turn it down. And like, it's like by knowing that I'm only doing things that are in alignment with what I consider my purpose, I was able to be like, nah, and not feel bad about it. Cause normally I'd be like, oh, I don't want to let this person down.
Right,
I don't want to do that. And I'm like, no.
Right. You don't even know this person. Or maybe you do. Like, it's like.
Yeah, but it's okay.
It's you.
But then I think about it and it's like, okay, so have you ever done something for somebody that you didn't want to do? And then you were kind of like, ugh.
And you're mad the whole time.
Exactly. And then you might be snippety snappy with the person. Please don't do anything for me if you don't want to do it. Just say no.
Please don't do nothing for me if you just want to remember it for the next 10 years.
And remind me, please,
right.
let's not
terrible.
do that. Exactly. But I think that's a very simple thing of boundaries that you can do. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. Yeah, your friends will forgive you.
And respecting other people when they say no, or when they say to respect a certain boundary. Have you ever had somebody tell you, like, hey, you're crossing this line, or however, I don't even know how you say that, because, like, who has that convo? But, like, hey, you're crossing this line, buddy. Has anybody ever said that to you?
Not
At your boyfriend, say, hey, stop calling me.
Nah.
I have, actually. Now that I think about it, I have.
You've told somebody to stop calling you?
No, I've had somebody check me on their boundaries.
Oh, like I've definitely been checked, not in that particular one, but like been checked on boundaries. I think like one of my best friends, Tibet, that I've had since I was like 13, she dove into boundaries and all these things way before I did. And she was just like, I feel like I need a couple of weeks, with not talking to anyone. She's like, you're still my best friend, but I won't be talking to you for a few weeks. And I'm like, okay. At first I was just like, wait, what? And I was like, okay.
Is this somebody that you used to talking to like every day or something?
Yeah, her and I were talking like every day, and then she was going through this period of growth where she needed like to not talk to anybody, and so she's real good about being like, nope, like about everything, and I like that.
Yeah, and with me, it was expecting communication, not thinking about like what they were going through or what's going on their side. So maybe kind of similar there, where just got to the point where, hey, you're not respecting me. Like, respect my shit is what they kept saying to me. And I was like, I didn't get it. I'm like, I'm just trying to make sure you're okay, because something had happened to them, and I kept hitting them. Want to see if they're okay. Give them a little bit of time. Then I'm like, hey, just checking in, and then you give them a day. And it's like, all right, when you start getting angry about it, you're like, I'm starting to feel some kind of way. And, it's like, you're making this all about you.
Ooh.
And it's like, you got to respect me, because, this happened. I'm sitting here trying to worry about, do I need to get surgery? I'm trying to worry about this. Does this need to happen? This, I have this and this and this. Like, it's not about you. Like, you need to just respect me and give me space to figure out what I'm figuring out. And the funny thing is, again, I'm that same type of person where I like to figure things out myself too. And yet I want somebody else, like, let me all into it so I could be a part of it. And, even with me, I was like, well, you could at least just told me. If you just tell me what's going on, then I would know to respect and leave you alone, which I do like, right? And which is the compromise that happens. Like, just tell me, like, hey, I'm going through something, and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
Like, I'll leave you alone. But then he's like, well, okay, but I just told you, like, what's different now, Like, and, like, when you think about it, nothing's different. Like, me knowing about it doesn't really do anything for it. So it is kind of understanding how other people operate and respecting that as well.
Yeah. And I think you hit a really important point we really haven't mentioned before, is a lot of times when you're crossing someone else's boundaries, you're making stuff about you, and your feelings are getting hurt when it actually has nothing to do with you.
Yeah, nothing. And then I've seen when other people are, I can tell somebody else's feelings are hurt. And I'm like, you want to tell them, like, it has nothing to do with you. Like, literally, if I'm distant, or if I didn't answer something, or whatever, like, I'm literally trying to do some stuff, or like I'm in the middle of something or whatever, and it's not about anybody else necessarily. So that's something to just kind of check with yourself about other people's boundaries.
Yeah, because I've definitely been that person, like, to take stuff personally that has nothing to do with it, and tell me, like, look, fam, not everything actually has to do with you. Like, oh, you're right.
But how has having boundaries served you well? I know you already asked me this earlier, but for you, do you see any differences specifically thinking about because you've put certain boundaries in place?
I just feel so much more confident and powerful, like, in myself. The fact that I own my power to choose, and I own my agency, and I can say no, and I can shift things around, and it's improved my relationships, like, business-wise, because then I'm not feeling like my clients are, like, running all over me or expecting too much out of me when I'm clearly communicating my boundaries. And relationships is helped because, like you just mentioned, like, I respect other people's. I'm not taking everything serious. Like, personally, I know my boundaries and what I do want and what I don't want, and what I will and won't accept in any of my, like, friendships and relationships. Like I said, clear ones, and I mean, there are some unspoken ones, but, like, that we end up talking about eventually. And it's just helped with clarity and with confidence and just feeling good about the things that I'm doing. Like, I'm not feeling like I'm putting myself on the back burner, which I feel like people who give a lot or try to help others a lot can tend to do to themselves. And so it's like, you can do both. You can help people, but also take care of yourself. And I think you actually help people more when you're taking better care of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said before, you're really just, your energy's better, your mood's better, you're in better spirits. It's so interesting how, like, if I'm sad one day, and then, like, with women too, sometimes our hormones, like, really exacerbate it too, when you're, like, the overthinking sometimes. And so, but again, it's all knowing yourself. Like, I've literally been in an attitude about something, or maybe I didn't hear from them, and they might talk to me yesterday morning. You know what I mean? Like, it's really not that serious. But I'll, look at your app and it's like, okay, I know my body's doing this. Or, write down something. Like, you really just understand, like, you just need time to figure yourself out, right? But for the times that you do feel like your boundaries are being crossed, or if you feel like you have not explored what those even really are, what your needs are, we would say, like, as listeners, like, do some exploration. Look up that Baggage Reclaim blog, do some reading. Hers is mostly about relationships. Google boundaries, see which ones or what types of boundaries you're letting getting crossed. Because maybe you're just like, man, I'm always irritated about a certain thing, but you haven't actually, categorized that. So really pay attention to yourself, know yourself, and pay attention to what you need.
And that's really where it all starts. If you don't know what you need, you can't effectively set boundaries. And then most likely you're also pushing up on other people's because you don't know what you need. So you're looking for what you need in other people.
Yeah, and as you move more powerfully, you'll be more successful. You'll move with things greater. Your relationships with people will be better. The story I was trying to finish when I started this whole thing, went to a whole nother spiel, was that, like, sometimes when you notice you're in a bad mood and then, like, you realize, like, hey, like, I don't need whatever that thing is, right? That thing you're kind of waiting for, that other person or whatever thing you need to activate your mood. It's like, yo, I have that. I can pull that out. I can pull that energy out. And then when you do realize you can pull that good energy out from yourself without needing anything from somebody else, whatever you do to make yourself feel good, you really feel way more powerful. Like, I have a great day. And I'm like, it doesn't even matter that that person didn't call you. You're not really thinking about it like that anymore. And as you do that over and over and over, it builds this habit of you're being a self-sustainable person with your own mood, your own energy, your own love, and all of that. And so you're just a more equipped person, I think, to get things done and to, like, let things happen and evolve around you.
Instead of trying to control them and enforce them, like, if you are looking to be happy, build your happiness, and anything else that anyone brings to your life is just extra. Like, you're not depending on them for it.
So this week, screenshot if you enjoyed the conversation. If you have any questions about boundaries, hit us up.
Or if you have any good stories.
And let us know, like, what boundaries you have in place. If there's anything with work or family business that you are like, these are kind of things that I stick to. Or if you've found some new ones that you're developing, feel free to screenshot, share, let us know. If this episode was helpful to you, send it to a friend, text it to a friend, let them know about Carlie's Couch.
Dun, 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 dun.
And this week's shout out, Carlie has one for us.
This week's shout out is Butter and Keep It 100. It's a run club in Inglewood in South LA. And they had an amazing event week before last, a couple weeks ago, called Run for the Function. It was a Nike activation in Inglewood. They shut down Market Street, had like 300 people of color come out and run. People brought their kids. It was so beautiful. We all did a 3-mile run just around the city. And there's nothing like that in the city. And so people were like, kind of like, what are they doing? And where are these people running from? What are they running to? And then some people were like really excited, like outside giving us high fives and cheering for us. Just raising awareness for health, for mental health, for building community. So shout out to Butter for doing great things. I think he started Keep It 100 maybe like a couple years ago, and it's just grown into this big, beautiful thing.
Yeah, so if you follow Keep It 100, you'll also see like their schedule for when they do running throughout the week. They all meet up and then they go on runs down in South LA area. I keep telling them to bring it up north, but I'm not going down to Manhattan Beach. But for all of you who can, please hit them up, follow them, and be a part of that movement.
Yep. And we'll have their Instagram tagged in the episode notes so you can follow them. And then we have the question of the week. Lex, what if I sought peace where I am right now instead of in distant lands?
The more at peace I am with where I am right now in the present, the more relaxed I am, the less anxious I feel, and the happier I feel because I'm not thinking about things that aren't my reality. Like, the only thing that's my reality is right now. And so, to think about anything that's coming up or anything that's behind me isn't in existence yet. And so it helps me just to stay present in the moment and feel better.
Oh, that's a hard one to follow. That's a great answer. When I was teaching yoga last night, it's so interesting. Synchronistically, I was talking about this because when people do yoga, there's something called like a yoga high, like people get a runner's high. And I was like, just know that this peace, like this feeling, like you created it for yourself and you always have access to it. It's like inside of you. And so I think that it just improves the quality of our lives and helps us to feel better if we just look for everything that we need. Peace, love, whatever it is, like inside. Just helps you feel more full.
That's a good answer, too. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Year 2 of The Couch.
Year 2. We in this
Signing
thing.
out. Bye.
Peace.